Alright, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Grizzly's Cave. This is Grizzly Andrew, and this episode is going to be part 2 about the late Hayabusa. But before I continue, I want to plug the next NAW wrestling event, which will be Saturday, December 13th at 7 p.m. at the Nebo Community Center in Nebo, Kentucky, and the doors will open at 6 p.m. Ticket prices are as follows. Free for anyone ages 0 to 5, $5 for anyone ages 6 to 12, and $8 for anyone ages 13 and up. Concessions will be available. It is a family-friendly promotion, and I promise folks you will not be disappointed. And also folks, I'm going to throw this out there, and I didn't mention it on the last episode, but I've been thinking about this. If you or anyone you know that owns a business that would like to be a sponsor for Grizzly's Cave, you can reach out to me. I actually have an email specifically for Grizzly's Cave. It's grizzliescave@yahoo.com. Basically, it's spelled the same way that the podcast is spelled out. The only difference is that there's not an apostrophe before the S, so it will be grizzliescave@yahoo.com. Again, if you or you know someone that owns a business that would like to sponsor Grizzly's Cave, you can reach out to me at that email address. You can also reach out to me on Facebook Messenger at Andrew Brian McGregor. Also, I've been thinking about this too, that email that I mentioned. If any of our listeners, whether they're fans or they're wrestlers, if they would like to email me their experiences that they would like shared on future episodes of Grizzly's Cave, please feel free to email the Yahoo address that I had mentioned. Again, it's grizzliescave@yahoo.com. Alright, so we're going to continue on with the life and career of the late Hayabusa. So where we left off at was May 31st, 1992 at Korakuen Hall. Hayabusa, who was still wrestling under his name of A.G. Izaki, he would face off against Katsuji Yuta, and Izaki would get knocked out early in the second round. And then on June 28th, 1992 at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would face off against Shoji Nakamaki, who was 35 years old at the time. And Izaki was 12 years younger than him, but Izaki had more seniority over Nakamaki in the FMW dojo. Izaki would end up getting the win, and apparently Nakamaki was not progressing as far as basic rookie skills, but was basically allegedly kept around because of his famous name. On July 19th at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would once again face off with Katsuji Yuta and would once again get knocked out, although Izaki would make it to the third round before losing. On August the 10th at the Osaka Prefectural Gym, Izaki would face off against Sabu once again. And although he would end up taking the loss, he would be able to get in more offense, including nailing Sabu with a drop kick before taking the loss. Izaki would idolize Sabu for his style, as each FMW dojo student would be told to pick a current FMW wrestler to strive to have that type of style in the ring. And for Izaki, it would be Sabu. And folks, if you get a chance to watch some of Hayabusa's matches that I've mentioned on the previous episode, You will see how similar his and Sabu's wrestling styles are, as well as their wrestling attire. I've always thought of Hayabusa, he was kind of a hybrid between the late Sabu as well as Rey Mysterio. On August the 22nd, Ezaki would lose to the Great Punk again. Ezaki would continue to show improvement, but would continue to still pay his dues by losing to anyone that outranked him by seniority, and this was again at Korakuen Hall. On August the 23rd, at the Saga Mahara iWorld Shop parking lot, Ezaki would face off against Atsushi Onita for the first time in his career. Ezaki would team up with Yukihide Uno, who was debuting a new gimmick called Battle Ranger Z, and Koji Nakagawa as the young students that would take on the top three in FMW, that being Atsushi Onita, Tarzan Goto, and Sambo Asako. Ezaki would get busted open during the match, but would fight back against Onita as well, and he would show some spark before Goto would end up finishing off his student by putting Ezaki away with a facebuster. And folks, if you don't know what a facebuster is, you basically get the way Goto did it was a little bit different than the way I've seen other people do it. So Goto would pick his opponents up as if setting somebody up for a pile driver, but instead of dropping your opponent on their head, Goto would twist his body while holding his opponent in that pile driver position and would plant them face first on the mat. It was pretty brutal to watch. I saw him put Onita in that move quite a few times in a match that him and Onita had back in the early 90s. On September 19th at the Yokohama Stadium, Eiji Ezaki and Koji Nakagawa would team up to take on Kevin Foley, and a name you all are very familiar with, Chris Jericho. Jericho and Foley would be told beforehand to make sure that Ezaki's moonsault was protected during the match. Ezaki would end up hitting the moonsault on Jericho. However, Jericho's partner missed his cue, as we would say in community theater, but he came in late and was unable to break up the count. So unfortunately, Jericho had to call an audible and was forced to kick out of the move. Jericho and Foley would end up coming off the top rope with a double drop kick on Ezaki, and Jericho would score the pinfall victory over Ezaki. On October the 11th at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would once again fall to Yuta's punch in the second round, after Yuta would end up knocking out Ezaki. Unfortunately, Ezaki would just not have enough strength to compete against Yuta and his boxing skills. On a sidebar, maybe he should have, no, I don't think rope-a-dope, the rope-a-dope style that the late Muhammad Ali used, I don't think that would have benefited Ezaki, but maybe float like a butterfly, sting like a bee might have worked a little better. On November 20th at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would work an 8-man tag team match along with FMW wrestlers Sambo Asako, Ricky Fuji, and then a Florida independent wrestler by the name of Haystacks Calhoun Jr. And they would take on the team of the Psychos and the Alligators, and Alligator Man number 1 would wind up pinning Ezaki. On November 27th, 1992 at the Yokohama Bunka Gym, Ezaki would have a match with Koji Nakagawa in the opening match of the show. And just like any other FMW show that Ezaki had when he was in a match with Nakagawa. Ezaki would get the win with the moonsault. And then they would have a rematch on December the 7th. Actually, scratch that, folks. My bad. I messed up on that one. We'll scratch that. Sorry. On January 5th, 1993, at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would lose again to Katsuji Yuta, and he would lose by knockout, this time in the third round. On January 6th, at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would take on Dr. Luther, and the two would have the best match on the show. Dr. Luther would tell everyone backstage that he felt Ezaki had the talent to be a star in wrestling and should be protected better. Although Ezaki was still in an opening match, he knew the talent he possessed compared to the rest of the roster. And he would even tell other wrestlers that even though Atsushi Onita was, the big money draw, the all-time star of FMW, Ezaki was saying that he would be the star of FMW soon enough. We'll come back to that a little later on. On February 21st at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki and Mr. Ganosuke would team up against the Gladiator, Mike Awesome, and Dr. Hannibal. Ezaki and Ganosuke, known as I mentioned on the last episode, the Kyushu Express, they did a lot of double team maneuvers similar to the Rock and Roll Express, the Rockers, etc. Some of those double team moves included Ganosuke delivering a drop kick the same time that Ezaki would deliver a spinning heel kick to their opponents. But unfortunately, the Gladiator and Dr. Hannibal would prove to be too powerful for the young team. And the Gladiator, even in FMW, well before he went to ECW, he would wind up finishing off Ezaki with an awesome bomb. Sidebar here. Next to the Undertaker's Last Ride powerbomb during his American Badass / Big Evil biker days, other than that power bomb, I'd have to say that the Awesome Bomb was one of my favorite power bombs of all time. But anyways, moving forward, on March the 5th at Korakuen Hall, the Kyushu Express would face off against each other, with Mr. Ganosuke defeating Ezaki by making him submit to a single leg crab. On March 17th at the Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center, the top three young wrestlers of Ezaki, Mr. Ganosuke, and Koji Nakagawa would team up against the team of Sabu, Tiger Jeet Singh Jr., and for those of you some of you around my age, maybe a little older if you followed WWF, back in the mid-90s, Tiger Jeet Singh Jr. was the man that eventually became Tiger Ali Singh. And their partner was Judge Dredd. And no, we're not talking Sylvester Stallone, Judge Dredd from the mid-90s. But that team would go on to defeat Ezaki and his team. On March 29th at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would continue to be fed to bigger wrestlers as a way of proving himself, as he would lose to Judge Dredd, who was a very tall, they would call them foreign, but generally your foreign wrestlers were usually from the States. And Judge Dredd would defeat Ezaki with a chokeslam. On April 22nd at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would face off against Battle Ranger Z, who was Yukihide Uno under a costume, and this was after Uno returned full-time from his excursion in Mexico. Uno would still have issues with Ezaki and unfortunately would take liberties during this match, but long story short, he wound up defeating Ezaki in that match. On May the 5th at Kawasaki Stadium, Ezaki would open up the show again. This time it would be against Nakagawa. Ezaki was looking to impress the largest audience that had ever been seen in an FMW show at this time, and he tried showcasing his high-flying moves, and he defeated Nakagawa with a moonsault. At this point, it was becoming more apparent that Ezaki was one, if not the best worker in FMW already. On June 8th at the Okinawa Air Force Base, this was a special show, and it would see a match with Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto. They would take on the younger FMW wrestlers in Battle Ranger Z, Eiji Izaki and Koji Nakagawa. And this gave Izaki another chance to face off against Onita as well as his teacher, Tarzan Goto. Izaki would hit some of his high-flying moves on Onita, and he would even bust him open. But Onita would end up hitting Izaki with his Fire Thunder Powerbomb to get the win. And folks, I will tell you this: I've watched some clips of the Fire Thunder Powerbomb. It makes me cringe sometimes. It's devastating, but it will make you cringe seeing it if you haven't already. On June 28th at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would again defeat Koji Nakagawa with the moonsault in the opening match of the show. On July 16th, he would team up with Battle Ranger Z, but they would lose to the team of Amigo Ultra, now going by the name Damien. And Damien's partner was the Zombie. Now, I do not believe it's the same Zombie that appeared in the WWE's version of ECW in 2006, so I'll just make that disclaimer. On July 24th at the Kita Kyushi Stadium, Izaki would team up with Katsuji Yuta and Mr. Ganosuke, and their opponents were Shirk Road, Chiaki Matsuyama, and Abe, with Ganosuke picking up the victory over Matsuyama. Izaki would end up making his first impact on the main event of the show after Atsushi Onita would defeat the late Mr. Pogo in an exploding barbed wire double hell death match. Pogo would end up attacking Onita after the match, and well, basically Izaki would end up trying to save Onita. I'm sorry, not Izaki. There was a wrestler by the name of Mr. Chin. He was an old IWE wrestler that was in his 60s, and he turned into a comedy opening card match wrestler. He would end up trying to make the save for Onita, but Mr. Pogo would end up throwing Chin into the exploding barbed wire. Onita would end up covering Chin's body, and Pogo would then blow a fireball at Onita's back. Izaki would then rush to the ring to cover Onita's burnt body and protect them both until more help could come. Izaki and Masato Tanaka would both grab Chin's unconscious body and carry him to the back to safety. I've seen some of those fireballs that Mr. Pogo would blow, and I mean, we're talking Gene Simmons style, but the fireball would last even longer. It wasn't just instant. It would last it would actually last for a little bit. Um, on September 17th in Ibaraki, Izaki would be entered into the FMW Independent Junior Heavyweight Title Tournament. His first round opponent would be Koji Nakagawa, and as I've stated earlier on this episode and earlier episodes, Izaki defeated Nakagawa many times within the course of a year. However, this match would be different, as Nakagawa would be the one to hit the moonsault Izaki, and he would actually get the pinfall in the pinfall victory. Nakagawa, though, would end up breaking his arm after hitting that moonsault and was rushed to the hospital afterwards. Nakagawa would be out of the tournament, and then Izaki would be brought in as his replacement to take Nakagawa's spot. On September 25th, Izaki faced off against Battle Ranger Z in the semifinals of the tournament. Izaki would be outmatched by the more experienced Battle Ranger, who would end up and again defeat Izaki and advance to the finals, where Battle Ranger would end up losing to the eventual tournament winner in the great Sasuke. On September 27th at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would end up defeating a new FMW dojo student by the name of Masato Tanaka in the opening match of the show. And yes, folks, it is the Masato Tanaka that had countless battles with Mike Awesome in ECW. Izaki would get told that Atsushi Onita wanted to speak with him. Izaki was obviously nervous, and he had been told in the past about Tarzan Goto wanting to speak with him, but getting called in by Goto was like the teacher wanting you to stay after. And Onita was like getting called into the principal's office. Onita would simply state to Izaki, "You go to Mexico immediately." Izaki would bow and say yes. They wound up posing for pictures to the media afterwards for the magazines. And Izaki had actually cried about the announcement. And although it was staged, those tears from Izaki were real, as he did not want to go based off his previous experience a year earlier. He would be told it was going to be an overseas study, and that since Ichihara had just returned from Mexico, there was not enough room in the undercard for Izaki. Shoichi Arai, again the ring announcer for FMW, he wound up writing a book shortly before he being Arai, passed away. He actually wrote a book, and allegedly he stated that the reason that Onita sent Izaki to Mexico was because they would go out after shows, and since Izaki was Onita's assistant, he would always come with them, and all the girls would go over to Izaki instead of Onita. Might have had some jealousy issues, or maybe that damaged his ego. But like I said, folks, that's alleged, so I can't say for certain. Izaki would go to Akito Ichihara, who had just returned from Mexico, and Izaki would ask for Ichihara's advice. Ichihara would suggest for him to bring extra clothes, tights, and shoes, as he will have several matches a week. Izaki would decide that if he was going to Mexico, that he would want to wrestle in a mask, like the Mexican tradition, and would then return to Japan back as Eiji Izaki. He would get out a college rule notebook and begin drawing design ideas for what he would want his mask to look like, as he wanted it to stand out. He would come up with a design that would be a mixture of a ninja and a bird, since he wanted to be flying like a bird could. His design was based on manga illustrator Shotaro Ishinomori's Henshin ninja Arashi. He wanted to leave the top open so his hair could stick and add kumadori paint around his eyes like a kabuki actor. He also came up with an idea to use what's called a happy, which is a Japanese robe, for his entrance. Ezaki would call his parents and let them know about the trip to Mexico and that it would be for an overseas study. He would get in a package in the mail a couple of days later stating that it was from the Japanese style hotel and it would have a happy as well as $10,000 yen. But there would be a couple of that, which would be the equivalent of 100 US dollar bills, or be a couple of Benjamin Franklins, basically. Ezaki would wait to tell the girl he had been speaking with, Harumi, as she would not find out until October 1st about his trip, when he was scheduled to leave on October the 5th. Sounded like AG had some explaining to do there. Apparently, Harumi was extremely upset and even asked Ezaki not to leave her, and Ezaki would not be able to answer her exactly when he was going to return, as he could not return until he showed improvement of his skills in the ring. So on that same day, he arrived at the Narita airport with some of the other FMW dojo students. Mr. Ganosuke would pose for a picture with Ezaki, while Nakagawa would give Ezaki a Spanish to Japanese dictionary as a present. Ezaki would fly 12 hours to Los Angeles. Whenever he arrived, obviously customs went through his belongings. Apparently he was only going to be on a 3-month visitor's visa. Customs searched his bag and they saw his wrestling costume in there, and they asked him about it. Since Ezaki was only there on a visitor's visa and not a work visa, because FMW had not spent the extra money on that, he had to tell the guard that it was for his nephew, and that it was a big because his nephew was a big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan, apparently. Ezaki eventually cleared customs and then went to wait for Damien, and he was told that Ezaki would pick him up from the airport. Ezaki wound up waiting 4 hours in the baggage claim area for Damien to pick him up. Ezaki, while waiting, did start to worry that Damien was not ever going to come pick him up, and that Ezaki would have to fly back to Japan due to not being picked up. I think a lot of it was he was also afraid of being embarrassed and being a laughing stock to the FMW company if that happened. But Damien eventually arrived, and unfortunately, Damien did not apologize for being 4 hours late. Instead, he just grabbed Ezaki's bags and put them in the trunk, and then they headed off to Tijuana with Ezaki basically silently enraged for having to wait that long with no reason given. Okay, so me personally, on a side note, if I'm supposed to pick somebody up and I show up 4 hours late, me personally, with my demeanor, I'm going to fucking apologize till the cows come home, and definitely apologize to someone that's been having to wait for that length of time, especially at an airport. I've had to wait in airports for a layover if I was having to get onto a different flight. I mean, that would last for maybe an hour, and that was brutal enough. But 4 hours? No, that's not cool, man. So Damien wound up driving 2 hours with Ezaki in the vehicle with him 2 hours from Los Angeles to Tijuana, to where Damien was living. Izaki brought up that he wanted to practice soon with Damien, and Damien basically told him okay later. Damien only knew Spanish and Izaki only knew Japanese, so there was definitely that communication barrier between the two. Izaki wound up staying with Damien's family, and while his wife was very nice and would feed Izaki dinner, apparently Izaki was not accustomed to all the seasoning on the food. Izaki was always worried about being too skinny for professional wrestling. He did manage to gain some more weight, so he actually managed to get up to 200 pounds. After his first 6 months in Mexico, he wound up losing 20 pounds, basically due to the food not agreeing with him. We'll say it like that. During his first month, though, Izaki didn't have anything to do, and other than work out and go to the beach and tan. That sounds like a nice little vacation, but I know stuff can get expensive from time to time, especially if it feels like a vacation. There were times Izaki would look out at the Pacific Ocean and wish he could just swim his way back. He would just sit on the beach and listen to a cassette tape that Harumi had made for him. Harumi would also send Izaki letters as well as money to get by. Izaki eventually wound up getting Damien to take Izaki to a mask maker, and Izaki would show the maker the design that Izaki had come up with for the type of mask he wanted to use. The mask maker told him that he would have it ready in 2 days. Apparently, he also had a collection of masks that he had hanging over the walls of his building. Izaki would come back 2 days later and find out that the mask maker had not made the mask for him like he had told him that he would. Apparently, Izaki was told that the mask was just so weird about due to the top part being open, and there was so much space in between the eyes as it leaves too much of the face exposed. Izaki would respond that the whole point of the mask was to be different and would ask him if he could make the mask or not. The mask maker did respond that he could, with Izaki basically telling the mask maker to make it then. Izaki wound up coming back 3 days later, and this time the mask was ready. Apparently the mask had just been finished. Izaki apparently could still smell the glue on the mask, and Izaki put the mask on and would look in the mirror and think that the look had a bright future that was filled with promise. Izaki now had his mask ready, but he still had no bookings and would ask Damien about it, and Damien again would respond with, okay, later. Izaki was growing frustrated that was the only response that he was getting after 2 months of not working, and he eventually snapped at Damien and told him that he was tired of hearing about it, or he was tired of hearing that, and that Ichihara had told Izaki that he was working several shows a week. Damien would then state that the promotion was doing better back then and was not doing so well anymore, and so they had less shows as a result. And the name of the promotion was, ironically, it was called the WWA. Izaki stated that he wanted Damien to take him to the WWA office to talk to them about the situation, and Damien responded that he could not do that. Izaki would respond with asking if he was the reason he could not because if he was, he asked Damien if he was afraid that basically Izaki was going to take his spot on the roster. And immediately after, Izaki would apologize for saying that. Damien had responded that Izaki could not work a match in Mexico because his ring name was A.G. Izaki, and that was not a name that the Mexican audience could say. Izaki would then come up with a name he had already thought about using before arriving to Japan, and that was what he became best known as, Hayabusa. The name fit what his design was based off of, which was a ninja that could morph into a bird. Izaki had borrowed the name from the high-speed roller coaster called the Hayabusa at Tokyo Summerland. Izaki would have Damien take him to the WWA office where he would show his mask. A copy of Pro Wrestling Weekly that had pictures of him to show that he had wrestling experience, and he would also tell them that his ring name was Hayabusa and ask that they would book him on their next show. The office would respond that he, being Izaki, would have to train in the Lucha Libre style before he could wrestle. So they would set up Izaki with Rey Mysterio Sr.'s Lucha Libre school. Izaki would have to take the beginner's class on Lucha, which was filled with young school children due to so many children aiming for Lucha Libre to get them out of their poor life. When I say poor, I'm just, referring to financial well-being and whatnot. It was basically going to get them in better financial standing if they were to pursue Lucha Libre wrestling. Izaki would be embarrassed to be training with young children, but he knew that he had no choice. He would begin practicing with the school children on the mat, and to make things even worse was his previous wrestling training had hurt him in this type of environment. Izaki had a very difficult time grasping Lucha because all the technology of wrestling he had learned was useless. Maybe not technology, we could say psychology or whatnot. While training during one of his sessions, Izaki would get approached by an 18-year-old Rey Mysterio Jr. who was helping his uncle at school that day. Mysterio would start the conversation by asking Izaki about Damien. Mysterio would then have a practice session with Izaki, and Izaki apparently impressed Mysterio a lot, to the point that Mysterio told him, "Good job, amigo," after their practice. Things would start to look better. I'm going to go ahead and call him Hayabusa now. Things would start to look better for Hayabusa as Akito Ichihara would return back to Mexico for another learning experience or excursion or apprenticeship or whatever you all want to call it. And Izaki would finally have someone that could understand him, and there wouldn't be that much of a communication barrier. Ichihara would also have trouble getting booked by WWA on this trip, but Hayabusa would finally be told that he had finished his Lucha Libre training and that he would debut for the promotion. Hayabusa would then head back to Los Angeles on their way to Tijuana for the WWA show, and Hayabusa would make his debut under the mask. Damien would stop the car and suggest that Izaki get out of the car and climb up to the top of the hill by the road, and he would take pictures of him as Hayabusa before making his debut that night in Tijuana. And it would be the first ever picture of Izaki as Hayabusa. Izaki would arrive in Tijuana and enter the building and see the match lineup written, and he would see the name Hayabusa written for the second match of the show. and Hayabusa would wrestle his first match under that particular name and mask in December of 1993. When Hayabusa came out, the fans would begin chanting Chino, Chino, which was Chinese in Spanish. Hayabusa would also get empty cups thrown at him as he felt fortunate enough that he was wearing the mask so that no one could see his disappointed face. I want to throw a little sidebar in here. I don't know if any of you all have watched the Dark Side of the Ring series. On season 1, and this would be episode episode 3 or 4, but it was about the death of Bruiser Brody. I know Abdullah the Butcher had stated whenever they would go for shows in Puerto Rico, apparently the fans would basically stone him. They had cups with rocks, and they were throwing the rocks. They were throwing the cups with rocks in them at Abdullah. I know Tony Atlas had said that there would be cups with urine and feces and all that. They would throw that at the wrestlers that when they were walking to the ring. So it is definitely possible that with what happened with Hayabusa, that even though that was in Puerto Rico, it's possible that this did happen in Mexico. So Hayabusa worked the match, but he would not be too happy about it, as he was still new to the Lucha Libre style. But he was glad that he had the Hayabusa gimmick, and that nobody would know that it was actually A.G. Yazaki that was doing so poorly in the ring. So Hayabusa's first paid match was about 10 he got paid 10 pesos, which was around 200 yen back at that time. And with that kind of money, it was the equivalent of being able to buy a taco and a Coca-Cola. Izaki would eventually tweak the Hayabusa design a little bit more and have more costumes designed, including the kimono that his parents had sent him. Also, one of the perks of being sent to Mexico and working for the WWA promotion is that Izaki would get to meet his first favorite wrestler when he was a child, and that was Mil Mascaras. And he, at the time, was the WWA champion. And Hayabusa also got to meet Dos Caras, who is Mil Mascaras' brother. Dos Caras is also the father of who we know as Alberto Del Rio. Hayabusa would work matches with Akito Ichihara in WWA. They participated in a lot of six-man tag team matches. There was a dilemma, though, that Hayabusa faced January. Well, actually, the new year of 1994 was right around the corner. But the big dilemma that Hayabusa was facing was that his visitor's visa was about to expire in January of 94. He did find out that the AAA promotion was running a show in Tijuana, and he would attend it. He would see Ultimo Dragon, and he introduced himself as A.G. Yazaki, and he also mentioned that he was from Onita's FMW promotion. Hayabusa would ask Ultimo if he could speak with someone about getting into AAA because his vacation visa, visitor's visa, whatever you want to call it, was expiring, and he would not be able to get it renewed if he was still working for WWA. Ultimo would tell him that he would need to go to Mexico City and that he could get his visa worked, that he could get his visa situated over there. So Hayabusa flew to Mexico City 2 days later. and he was incredibly confused by the Spanish transportation system. Um, he wound up staying at what was called the Pension Amigo Hotel, which was nicknamed Japan Inn, as it was where all the young Japanese wrestlers would stay while they were in Mexico City. Or other Japanese wrestlers such as the great Sasuke, Dick Togo, they stayed at the Pension Amigo Hotel. Hayabusa would get to meet Koji Kanemoto, Saito, who would go on to become Super Shisa, and the Black Cat, who were also staying at the hotel. As Hayabusa would end up forming a bond with Koji Kanemoto, and they would become really good friends during the rest of the time that Hayabusa stayed in Mexico. Hayabusa would spend most of his time on the phone with Harumi, as he learned that their phone lines did not charge long-distance international fees. Long-distance phone calls, that's definitely a blast from the past. Man, how times have changed. Hayabusa would end up meeting Antonio Pena of AAA, and he would ask to be included on their shows. Pena would agree for his Hayabusa to begin working for AAA, and told him he would pay him $800 a week. $800 a week, especially back in the early to mid 90s, that's a lot of money. And it seemed like a dream to Hayabusa, who was making maybe $2 to $3 a match in WWA. So this was a big step up for him. Hayabusa made his AAA debut in February, and he would deliver a tope con hilo for the first time for the first time ever in a match. The dream of being in AAA, it would be too good to be true, as Hayabusa did not get booked again by AAA for a month, and he never got paid that $800 for that one match that he had for that 1 week. Hayabusa would keep going to the AAA office, but Pena would never meet with him. He did get booked one more time in March of that year, and that would be it. Hayabusa would see who we all know as Conan or K-Dog, whatever you want to refer to him as. He was with AAA at the time. So Hayabusa would ask Conan what was going on with the lack of booking, and Conan had told him because New Japan and AAA have a partnership, and that was why Kanemoto was getting booked, and they did not want too many Japanese guys on the shows all the time. Hayabusa eventually got a call from Shoichi Arai that Onita wanted him to return to Japan for a New Japan quote-unquote all-star game of junior heavyweights. Hayabusa would respond back to Arai that he could not return as he was not ready, and he had less than 10 matches under his belt within the 6 months that he had been in Mexico, and that he was also afraid that his performance would discredit the FMW. Shoichi Arai eventually called Hayabusa back and told him that Onita was very demanding that Hayabusa participate. Hayabusa would ask Arai if he was supposed to return to Japan as himself, Eiji Izaki, or as Hayabusa. Arai stated that it did not matter which one he chose. Now, this does get mentioned in the Rise and Fall of Hayabusa video that's on YouTube. Hayabusa did choose to return under the mask and with the Hayabusa gimmick, and this was just in case if the match that he had, in a nutshell, stunk up the house. then he could return to FMW as AG Ezaki, and that no one would ever know that he was Hayabusa. Alrighty, give me just a second here. I just lost my spot. There we go. Ezaki, at the advice of Koji Kanemoto, would constantly train at the gym without knowing who all was in this all-star game tournament. Hayabusa would then get a call informing him that his match for the show would be against and folks, I know you all know who this is, Jushin Thunder Liger. My God, was that man an incredible worker. Hayabusa was a little bit freaked out, mainly at what was going to be expected in the match. Kanemoto told Hayabusa the stories of training with Jushin Liger. Kanemoto said that Liger had beaten himself up many times when he was a young boy. Hayabusa, as well as Ultimo Dragon, would receive direct flight business airline tickets to Narita in Japan. Hayabusa and Ultimo would sit next to each other on the flight, with Hayabusa babbling to Ultimo about his nervous feelings and how he wished he could run away. They were both picked up at the airport, and then they were taken to the Tokyo Shinjuku Kyo Plaza Hotel, which was a very nice and a very expensive hotel. That some of the foreigners, such as Hulk Hogan, Vader, or Andre the Giant, would always stay while they were touring for New Japan. Hayabusa would call Harumi, and she wound up staying with him for the entire 3 days at this luxurious hotel. Hayabusa would head over to the New Japan dojo the very next day, and he would find out all the wrestlers on the show for what is now called the Super J Cup, and that took place on April the 15th. Hayabusa returned and went shopping with Harumi in the Kabukicho district of Shinjuku. Jet lag and anxiety resulted in him struggling to fall asleep, and it resulted in him hitting the sleep timer of the alarm, and he wound up waking up at 7:50 a.m. and the bus was supposed to leave at 8 a.m. So within 10 minutes to Ryogoku. Hayabusa managed to get everything ready, and he was at the lobby for 8:15, which would result in the bus having to be held up, and Hayabusa felt very embarrassed. Hayabusa would meet with Mr. Ganosuke for the first time since leaving for Mexico in over 6 months. Hayabusa had told Ganosuke that he was wanting to make an impression and was going to attempt the shooting star press in the match that he was going to have with Liger. However, this would be the first time he ever attempted the shooting star press in any match. Hayabusa would practice in the ring before the show as he would climb up to the top rope, and he would actually perfectly execute it. Hayabusa's anxiety would eventually turn to confidence as he knew he could perform the move when the time was right. On April 16th at the Tokyo Ryogoku Sumo Hall, Hayabusa, this would be his first time in Japan for the New Japan Super J Cup tournament. This match was actually the last first round match. And I have seen clips of this match on YouTube, folks. If you can find the full match, I mean, that would be like discovering some lost treasure. But the highlights I watched of this match was it was a very impressive match. Hayabusa wound up getting a quick attack on Jushin Liger before the start of the match, and he kicked Liger out of the ring before he delivered a tope con hilo onto the floor at Jushin Liger. Hayabusa would show his completely new offense to Japan for the first time. And this was the first time for all these Japanese fans to see, because all they had ever been used to was seeing Eiji Ezaki wrestle, let alone, as well as, I'm sorry, not let alone, but as well as not wrestling with a mask on. And for these folks to see this new masked wrestler performing with one of the top junior heavyweights in this promotion, they were in absolute awe. However, Hayabusa was still not polished on some of his moves. When he did go up top to deliver his first ever shooting star press, he missed Liger completely, and after the miss, Liger would hit a running Liger bomb. And to Hayabusa, this was basically very similar to taking an awesome bomb. Liger would eventually get the victory. The match was very well received, and Liger would actually shake Hayabusa's hand after the match. And then Hayabusa's wrestling life would change because of that particular instance. On that big stage. Hayabusa, who had come out to the ring with Mr. Ganosuke, Koji Nakagawa, and Masato Tanaka, and Uno, would ask everyone how they felt the match had gone. Basically just trying to get a critique from everybody. Ganosuke stated that the match was good, while with Tanaka and Nakagawa agreeing. Uno did not respond because he was bitter towards Hayabusa. Apparently, Uno was originally slated for the show as an FMW representative. However, plans, I won't mention these journalists' names, but certain wrestling journalists like to say plans changed. Well, apparently that's what happened. Plans changed, and Uno was replaced by Hayabusa to be the FMW representative. On April 19th, Hayabusa was sent back to Mexico, and this was just 3 days after his Super J Cup match. And the irony was, folks, he had no matches booked for him when he went back to AAA. Jushin Liger would come back to Mexico in May, and he brought a VHS tape of the Super J Cup show, and they would all gather at Ultimo Dragon's house, and they would watch the VHS tape where Hayabusa got the chance to watch his match for the first time, and he would hear the announcer what they call inflate to the audience, that Hayabusa was very popular in Mexico during this match. Victor Quillones, he was with the IWA Japan promotion. They had yet to start running shows, but they would offer Hayabusa a contract for that promotion for $3,000 a month and a $10,000 sign-on bonus to become the top Japanese star of the promotion, due to the potential that was seen in Hayabusa at that Super J Cup tournament. However, one thing you folks will, if you haven't figured it out yet, but you will soon enough, or you'll hear enough of it, Hayabusa was very big on loyalty. He chose loyalty over money. He actually turned down the offer because he still wanted to remain loyal to FMW. Hayabusa would ask Ultimo Dragon, again, who worked for what was called EMLL, but I think it's what we now refer to as CMLL, to see if he could go talk to the promoter and get him booked for that promotion instead. I mean, you might as well see if that's possible. Consider you're not getting booked for the AAA shows. Ezaki would come with, I'm folks, I'm really tired. Hayabusa would come with Dragon to the shows, and afterwards Dragon would come back from meetings, and he would let Hayabusa know that he was booked on the show that night. Hayabusa had not brought his wrestling pants for the show, and that was just because he did not think he was going to be booked. The only thing he had brought was his mask for privacy, and unless if it was by special chance, he was going to have to find wrestling boots and some wrestling pants for a match. Alright folks, so I think we're going to end that episode on that note. We will pick up again for a part 3 for the life of the late Hayabusa. This is Grizzly Andrew signing off, saying take care and God bless.